All right, Phil, I've personally been waiting a long time for this moment to have you on the podcast. It's really nice to run it back. We're on a mission from God, and the team is at least partly back together. We've gathered today to discuss the Thai elections, in part because, and I will admit to the listeners, I am a relative novice when it comes to this. And Phil, although you have not been sort of in the flow of Thailand's day-to-day politics for, I don't know, how long has it been? 8 to 12 months you've kind of been out. You have forgotten more about Thai politics than I will ever be able to learn in the next couple of years. So I'm grateful for you coming on and lending your perspective and helping us make sense of what's going on. I guess we can sort of recap the results. So I think everybody was distracted, rightfully so, by Turkish elections. I described them as the most important elections happening this year. But the Turkish elections really, everybody thought that there was going to be a vote for change, and there wasn't really a vote for change. It was a vote for Erdogan and for continuity and sort of the same old thing. Thailand had elections the same day, and my take on this has been this was actually a real vote for change. But also the kicker there is that the Thai people have been trying to vote for change for, I don't know, decades, and the military keeps coming in and putting their foots on the scales. Most recently, there was the coup in 2014. Afterwards, they create this 250-person Senate that they have to sign off on whoever gets named prime minister. So even when you have a scenario right now where Thai opposition parties led by the Move Forward Party and its leader, his name is Pita. Do you know how to pronounce that name, Phil? Pita Limjan? I can't do it. I was on YouTube like for minutes beforehand trying to figure it out.
I do, but I'm just going to let you dangle.
Great. Okay. I think I see PETA and I'm like in the Hunger Games. But anyway, thank you for letting me dangle. But anyway, he's got 36% of the votes. He's already forged this coalition that has more than 50% in the House of Representatives needed. But he doesn't have enough to counter the 250-person military Senate. And I saw one report that said 12 senators said that they would vote for the opposition. But that's not going to quite cut it. He's got to come up with 60 to 70 more votes. And that's a lot to ask in a democracy for an opposition, even if it's really widely supported, to come in and get like a 2/3 or even 3/4 majority. So that's kind of where we are. Tell me where I'm wrong about that stuff, or where you think we should be focused as we try and understand the importance of these elections and what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, well, you're not wrong. I mean, he's not for a big vote for change in a system that was designed intentionally to resist it, and that's often what you'll see. Authoritarian governments do after some sort of coup is return to quote unquote democracy, but try to stack the system in a way that addresses some of their concerns, we'll say, and preserves the power of the establishment. In Thailand, the ruling elite have always been suspicious of full-on democracy. Their suspicions in their minds were validated overwhelmingly by Thaksin Shinawtra's aggressive version of democracy and success at using the quote-unquote will of the people to amass enormous power and threaten every dulled institution in the country, again, in their minds. So yeah, but it's still, it's a huge deal though, in the sense that it reflects, I think, a big paradigm shift that occurred a couple years ago, and that sort of fits neatly within the broader sweep of Thai history, especially recent, past 2 or 3 decades history about Thai political dynamics and the landscape of power in the country.
Yeah, I mean, so in the last, I guess I struggle here with whether this is also going to be different than the last election, because in the last election, the opposition also won a majority of seats in the House of Representatives. Not as quite a big a majority as this one, but still a majority. And that military-appointed Senate came in and put their foot on the scale. And so you got Prayut Chan-o-cha, see, I think I can pronounce that one, who is he's the incumbent now, and he's been there, and he is sort of the military's chosen leader. And, Thai politics didn't collapse. Companies didn't relocate their supply chains away from Thailand. Like maybe there were some protests in Bangkok, but it didn't actually meaningfully change anything. And people just kind of went along with the system. And I guess like the million baht question here, or the 10 trillion baht question here, is going to be, if the military does this again, if that Senate puts its foot on the scale and says, no, Chan-o-cha is going to have another run at this here, or even we're going to block PETA from being the prime minister. I mean, is it just going to be protests and then it's going to go away? Is it going to be Is it going to actually morph into broader societal unrest that forces changes in the Thai monarchy and the Thai political system? I mean, how do you, that the last time this happened, nothing actually changed, right? So why should we expect anything to change this time, or should we?
Yeah, no, that's a good question that I don't know. But I think it's worth looking at this in sort of the broader sense of what has changed, sort of outside of the top line electoral results and just in the landscape of power in general. So, I mean, if you think about, just if you indulge me for some Thai history, basically, so there's the longtime Rama IX, the beloved king. You see him everywhere in Bangkok, the God King. He was a force for stability, portrayed as being above politics and everything. Really, what that was an era of pretty dominant military political elite, with him sort of as not just a figurehead. He had power, but he was very subtle in the way he used it, and it was mostly, there's a lot of symbolic power. I don't know if you've seen The Crown, season 1, when the queen is learning that, like, actually you really can't intervene all that often. Yeah, so that's, if you have power, but if you use it, you might lose it, because if they reject you, then you might, then they expose you as being an emperor with no clothes, right? So the Cold War era, basically, that was fairly stable, of limited democracy and so forth. Around the 80s, Thailand starts to get really rich, or not really rich, but there starts, it goes through the manufacturing boom and everything else that came along with globalization, and that started to stress some of the cohesion in the country. There's a lot of displacement of communities, new sources of power, and so forth. Along comes Thaksin Shinawatra, and along this time, you start naturally getting a push toward more liberal democracy, right? Culminating in the 1997 Constitution. Thaksin Shinawatra comes along. He's a guy, he was from the north, but had made all the right moves, all the right connections to take advantage of the wave of privatization in the country, and becomes a billionaire. And for the first time, but his genius politically was, in addition to just having a lot of money, was he was able to unify the very fractured political landscape outside of Bangkok, right? You think sort of who was that guy in Game of Thrones who united the tribes north of the wall? I don't remember his name.
Jon Snow.
Yeah, but not him, the other one.
Oh, Mance Rayder. There you go.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, nice. It was sort of like that. He unified the rural peoples, the rural communities, and so forth. And that made him, between the politics, between the money, it made him an unassailable political force. His parties have won basically every election that Thailand's had until this one. That really threatened the establishment. Along that time, at the same time, the king is starting to age. The prince at the time, the crown prince, now the current king, he was proving himself in public to be an embarrassment in all these different ways, or if not an embarrassment, at least it was clear he was not going to be able to have his father's esteem and everything. And so it really, for the next 20 years, it was, especially with the king's power stabilizing influence receding, it was Thaksin versus the sort of royalist elite, quote unquote royalist, meaning that basically everyone tries to take advantage of the monarchy and prove that the monarchy is on their side and so forth. But just for simplification's sake, it was Thaksin and the rural peoples versus the military elites and the elites of Thai society in business and so forth, going at it. And that period of disruption got real violent. Never quite spilled over into all out civil war in the way that most of Thailand's neighbors have. And I think that speaks to a lot of different subtle things about Thai culture and the king and everything else. There was this pattern of elections, and there's the 2006 coup. Then they held elections, and Thaksin's, one of his lackeys, won. This is right before my wife and I moved there the first time. This guy, he was a big gregarious personality. He was really funny. Named Samak. They disqualified him for something to do with a cooking show he had. So then they have another, not election, but they have another parliamentary vote, and Thaksin's brother-in-law gets installed as prime minister. and that's led to violent protests that we had some experience getting mixed up in. Tell that story. And he lasted about a month, and then they were able to disqualify enough candidates to get to form a government that was backed by the Bangkok elite, right? The Thaksin and his quote unquote red shirts did not like that. And back to the man's radar analogy, for the next 2 years, they actively invaded Bangkok, basically, culminating in 2010 with these mass long-term protests where they took over the Lumpini Park in the middle of the city, built a giant bamboo wall around this giant park, basically a central park, right? Like an actual bamboo fortress. We're lobbying, they had some. The thing about the military and security forces, like they tend to be pretty fractured as well. So there's always going to be some disaffected military faction that will be willing to, join your political movement. So they're, lobbing grenades from behind this bamboo wall just randomly into the city. That led to this massive showdown in 2010. I mean, it wasn't civil war, but it was basically, running battles in the streets of Bangkok, leading to the largest shopping mall in Asia getting torched. Saw it from an airplane. It was a really sad day. Point being is, like, it was really this almost, the Thai landscape of power has always been this delicate balance between the monarchy and the military and the business elites and this and that and this and that. But it really, for that era, it became this all-out zero-sum game between Thaksin and his people versus the military elites as embodied by this faction that led to 2006 and 2014 coups. Yeah, so back and forth, they finally hold another election. Thaksin's sister wins, Yingluck. She lasts for a while, gets to meet Obama and so forth. But then she gets ousted in 2014 by the coup led by Prayut. And so it's been this, Thaksin just struck so much fear into the hearts of all of Thailand's old guard. And it really was the dominant dynamic. There's a paradigm Thai protest culture. There's even in like small towns, like there's you're expected to go for broke, basically. Like it's not, you don't show up and then picket for a while and then go home. You show up, you stand there until whatever you're upset about, whether it's some deadbeat business owner or the provincial director of the local provincial government or whatever. You show up, you stand there until they give you something, and everyone saves a little bit of face and goes home. If you don't give them something, then things tend to explode. So that's what kept happening with Thaksin and the royalists. Meanwhile, the king is kind of withering away, receding from the scene. In 2008, he, when we got there, was the yellow shirts were trying to oust Thaksin's brother-in-law at that point. And, they were all marching around in Bangkok, holding pictures of the king and, basically trying to bring about a military coup. The king told them to, pass word that he was disapproved. He wanted them to go home, and everything. And they ignored him. They kept marching, holding pictures of the king. And at that point, he just basically quit and said, all right, I'm out. I have no more influence. I'm going to the coast. And that was kind of the end of it. And so he really receded from the scene, and that kind of accelerated or just poured gasoline on everything. But since the coup, the 2014 coup, it was basically stable. And I'm not by no means endorsing, authoritarian governments or anything like that. But the second time we lived there for about 6 years total into 2 stints. It was remarkable. I mean, it's just how politics kind of receded from most people's minds. There just weren't politics. The military held power. They passed it to themselves when they had a nominal transition to civilian government. When the king died, finally died in 2016 or 17. They used that as pretext to just shut everything down for another couple of years. And then, over that time, they were able to gear, rejigger the system and very much in their favor, so that when eventually they did return to elections, they could at least limit the power of any particular populist figure like the next Thaksin. So, long story short, it was a zero-sum thing. followed by a period of unsatisfactory but kind of relieving stability. And then all of a sudden this third force shows up. But it didn't really solve any of Thailand's underlying questions about the king, about this unsettled power structure, right? And that's what the growth of this third movement, the youth student-led protests that we started to see in 2019, I think, and with the current king mostly hanging out in Germany, not really caring all that much, that's where we are now. And so it is, even if nothing has changed in terms of who holds all the power, or even if Thailand's future is as uncertain as ever, it's a different landscape now, fundamentally different than it was a few years ago. And that's even with Thaksin's daughter finishing first, or his party, Putai, led by his daughter, finishing second in these elections, and basically playing kingmaker with the coalition role. I mean, so Thaksin's still very much in the game. It's just not this two-sided zero-sum thing anymore.
It's really striking that so PETA is what? He's 42 years old. He has degrees from, the JFK school. He's got a Master of Public Policy from JFK and an MBA from the Sloan School of Management at MIT. You've already talked about Shinawatра's daughter, who, he's still in self-imposed exile doing whatever he's doing, but she's running. But when you look at her background too, I mean, she's got a degree in international hotel management from the University of Surrey. Like, we're talking about very young people educated outside of Thailand for the formative years of their life, going against a defense minister or former defense minister turned prime minister, Kuster, who, I mean, just look at his picture. He looks like an old dude. He doesn't look like he's certainly not an agent of change. So it's, I don't know, you would think that in a country that has relatively older demographics, it's interesting that these two young guns are out there in the front and are getting such a large percentage of the vote. And it was also a lot of turnout. It was something like 75% turnout in the vote too. I mean, can you imagine what US election results we would get if we had 75% turnout in this country? It would absolutely change things. So there's passion out there too. But I don't really know how to read what exactly the opposition here is standing for. Is it, do they have some kind of thing that they're for? Is it pro-business? Is it just anti-monarchy? Is it just change? Like, what is it that they represent that you think that Thai people were voting for?
Yeah, so first of all, for the Putai Thaksin's daughter, she doesn't really command an independent political base. The reason why Thaksin always elevates family members to the top, when Yingluck was prime minister, she was a political novice. Same thing now with his daughter. She is a front for Thaksin himself. He's in Dubai, can't be there to participate directly, and so that's what he does to try to he'll never quit. I thought maybe this time he had quit, but no, Thaksin does not quit, and he still commands an enormous amount of loyalty, especially in rural provinces. But I think you're exactly right with PETA and the Move Forward movement. Yeah, what do they stand for? That is a good question. When the 2019, when the student protest started, and it was fundamentally different than, as I was getting at, than the Thaksin-led protest, right? It was never this go for broke showdown that resulted in running gun battles in the streets and so forth. It was very leaderless in the way that student protest movements often are, which makes them difficult to negotiate with, difficult to identify the direction, but also a little bit easier, maybe perhaps to wait out, I guess, a little bit less threatening in the big scene. I mean, Thaksin, as I mentioned, he was a threat to the establishment. I don't know if they really ever saw these student-led protests, but they did. We're able to translate that into electoral success with Thanatorn's victory, and now this one. And yes, it's fascinating that. So that was one interesting thing. It was just completely different than what was going on before. But it was super interesting that they were very explicitly opposed to the monarchy. That was a huge thing. That was a long-standing fear with the crown prince, now the king, was what happens when this guy who has a lot of power but can't use it, but has a ton of prestige and is a stabilizing force, maybe, but maybe not, what happens when he's gone, and what happens when the crown prince takes over. The longest time fear for the royalist elite was that he would side with Thaksin, and then that would, and there was hints that he was trying to early on, but that has not come to pass. I think he's generally happy. But back to the students and because the thing is, like, as I mentioned earlier, everybody has always just tried to take advantage, use the monarchy for their own gains, right? If you have a explicit seal of approval or an implicit one, that can go a long way. And given how, especially the elites stoke fear and motivate political support by invoking the monarchy and by framing things as, well, Toxin and his people want to get rid of the monarchy, and we the true Thai people, the true guardians of Thai culture and virtue and all these things, we want to protect the monarchy. Just, it's the same story that you see it play out elsewhere in different ways with religion or whatever. So the fact that they were deliberately starting a fight over this was super interesting, and it suggests that there's a lot of real frustration on the ground. Not necessarily. I think it's less about the king himself and more just the royalist establishment, and the way that especially Preut was and his government. They were using the lèse-majesté laws to crack down on just about anything. It had stuff that had nothing to do with the monarchy, including with Tanatorns when they were going after him after the 2019 elections. I think he was critical of Preut's handling of COVID, and they slapped him with a lèse-majesté charge. So that's the just general frustration, youth frustration with the sclerotic, self-serving, self-enriching elites. I think that's what it's more about than the actual, if the king's hanging out with the harem in Germany all the time and neglecting the Thai people. I don't think actually that many people care about it, but it's not something, I mean, maybe they find it distasteful or embarrassing, but it's not something that's you're going to build a political movement on. I think it's much more about the broader upheaval and frustration that you see all over the world, and that got magnified a lot during COVID.
Yeah. Well, I'll get you out of here on this. This has been a lot of inside baseball to a certain extent, but, we ostensibly think about this from a geopolitical perspective. Does this matter for the region? Is this really just, for geeks who want to know about Thailand? It's an interesting thing that's happening in a country that is relatively isolated, or are there ramifications here for the region based on which direction Thai politics goes?
Yeah, so that was as someone who loved Thailand and was obsessed with Thailand, who lived in Thailand and just wanted to read and write about Thailand, I was always struggling to make the case for why it ever mattered on a broader scene. Compared given its place in the regional landscape is, at least in terms of China's potential counterweights or pawns on the chessboard in the big U.S.-China geopolitical game or whatever. Yeah, Thailand's kind of hanging out on the side. It certainly matters. It has a very strategically important geography. It's an super important economic anchor for the region. It's got a lot of influence with its neighbors, all these things. But it's not the Philippines, right? It's not, directly on the front lines. It's not Vietnam. It's not Myanmar that's just falling apart. Thailand, I mean, for all its problems, I think the problems keep it from playing a bigger role in being able to throw its weight around more directly. But I don't, just by occasionally scaring off investors and whatever. But Thailand's also super resilient. They always bounce back from this stuff. In a lot of countries, 2010, that could have sparked just total chaos for years and years and years. And, it was they're cleaning it up by the next day. Thailand moves on. They have, China has a ton of influence there, but so does Japan, so does the U.S., so does Singapore, Taiwan. Thailand, they just kind of go along, get along, and yeah, and they're the Thai mentality is sabai sabai, which is very happy-go-lucky, no worries, and it really does permeate their geopolitical posture in a lot of ways.
Well, it doesn't sound like the results here, whether the opposition actually gets a prime minister or whether it's Chanacha or some other military representative. It doesn't sound like that's going to change Thailand's general posture, which is basically to play all sides in the region. Am I right about saying that?
You're right. Yeah, I think so in general. Even if someone came in and really wanted to steer the country in one particular direction, it would be difficult too, because it's just not a country that lends itself to being steered in a very concrete direction. And it doesn't really make sense for Thailand to strongly pick a side. I mean, it's leery of China's being bullied around by China, just like everyone else in the region. It's certainly not particularly up for a fight, pushing back. But they're very good at sort of, Thailand proudly is one of the few countries in the world that was never colonized, and they have a long history of deftly playing different sides off each other and sort of smiling and saying, yes, we'll do that, and then not doing it, or just doing something else. And so, they're good at this game, and they'll probably benefit from it in most ways. It just seems
to me like from an investment perspective, or if I'm a corporate that's thinking about supply chains, like all the other countries it seems to me like Thailand has a lot, like the best of all worlds. Like, yes, it has problems, but it has relative stability, it has resilience, it has access to both the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. I mean, Vietnam has tons of problems, and the Vietnamese Communist Party is doing all these purges, and like that's a whole other thing. The Philippines is, as you said, is on the front lines. Taiwan, who knows what Taiwan's future is really going to be. When you start to look at the countries in the region, Thailand's, at least to me, like relative to the other countries around it, even with all the things that we're talking about with its instability, it seems like one of the best bets in the region. If you're just thinking about relative stability or ability to do business, or ability for companies there to do well, am I a little too naively sanguine?
So yeah, I think its problems show up more on a micro level. In terms of, it's very difficult to, if it's always wrought with political instability and frequent changes of government and that kind of stuff, it does make it difficult for the country, which is to invest in infrastructure, take advantage of its position as a regional hub, to have policy continuity. Thailand's pretty famously has a lot of institutionalized corruption and so forth, and just on a practical matter, it's hard to know where the money's supposed to go and that kind of thing. So it certainly keeps Thailand from being more than the sum of its parts. I think it limits its potential, but it's got a pretty high floor too, if that makes sense. It's hard to see it becoming it doesn't have the if we're gonna put this in NBA terms, Indonesia is Zion Williamson, and Thailand is a good 3-and-D wing. Thailand is Jabari Smith. It'll frustrate you, but it'll solid. It's solid. It'll show up. It's steady.
It'll at least play games. It won't pull its hamstring trying to do something that no other human in the world could ever consider doing. Yeah, and at least you'll get some 3-and-D. All right,
right. Well, Phil, Indonesia's it's a hamstring pop waiting to happen every time it steps on the court.
Well, Phil, thank you for coming on and talking to us. If anything crazy happens with Thai elections, I hope you'll come back on. And if we have new developments about the Iran nuclear deal, or if my hobby horse from my Stratford days, Tunisia, enters the news, you can come back on and we can delve into Tunisia, and I can be just as geeky about something that probably doesn't matter geopolitically in general, but you can ask me about that too. So cheers, dude. It's good to see you.
Likewise. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur.